Hello, and welcome to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and today I'm going to help you speed up Speedy Entry again. Specifically, we're going to look at layers and voices in Speedy Entry. Now, in Finale, layers are groups of notes and rests in a measure that have their own independent stems and beams. And you can have up to 4 different layers in Finale, so essentially you could get 4 different independent notes and rests in a measure if you want. Now, I think in common parlance, we'd probably call these voices. But Finale has something called voices too. So to help delineate the two, there's layers and voices. Now, 99.9% of the time, you're going to want to use layers. It's a little bit more flexible. It's easier to manipulate with layers. But voices, there are a couple circumstances where voices come in handy, and I'll show you both of those right now. And we will start with layers. Now you notice that most of these notes in this file are black. Basically, that's indicating that all of these notes are in layer 1, and that's the default layer that you'll start with when you start entering notes. You can get to layer 2, 3, and 4 easily enough. In the bottom left corner, there is a little thing that says layer 1 here. If you click on that, this pop-up window comes up, and you can choose layer 2, 3, or 4. So let's choose layer 2. And if we go into Speedy Entry, we enter the Speedy Entry frame, and you'll notice that the black notes are now grayed out. Okay, so what this means is that the layer 1 notes are still there, but we're about to enter notes in layer 2. So all we have to do is enter notes as normal. And now we get some red notes, and the red notes will be notes in layer 2. Incidentally, layer 3 will be green, and layer 4 will be blue. All right. Now these colors won't print. These will all print as black notes, but this is just to help you identify which notes are in which layer as you're working in your file. So that's how you would do that. And there is an easier way to navigate between layers, specifically in Speedy Entry. If you're in a Speedy Entry frame, all you need to do is press Shift up or down to toggle between layers. So starting from layer 1, Shift down will get you to 2, 3, 4, and then back to 1. And from 1 up will get you to 4, 3, 2, and back to 1 in that manner, okay? So you don't have to go all the way into this bottom left corner to change the layers. There's one other way to get to different layers, and you don't even have to be in Speedy Entry. And there's key commands for it. So that would be Option Command 1, 2, 3, or 4 for layers 1, 2, 3, or 4. And I'm not going to demonstrate this right now because Option Command 1, 2, 3, and 4 actually controls some functions in my screen recording software, so I might end up just stopping the video by mistake. But trust me, it is Option Command 1, 2, 3, or 4 to switch between layers. All right, so a few things about layers. You'll notice that in this first measure that I wrote here, the layer 2, the red notes, the stems are down now, right? Was layer 1 remains up, as they normally would be anyway. But if we change this an octave higher, make it an octave higher, layer 1 still remains up, and layer 2 still remains down, right? So what Finale is doing is it's freezing the stems and beams as well. If I had some beams in here, those beams would go upwards as well. I could do that real quick just to illustrate that. All right, the beams are frozen up as well. So like I said, Finale is freezing the notes, the stems and beams upwards for layer 1 and downwards for layer 2. So it doesn't matter where on the staff lines, where in the staff the notes are, those notes will be frozen in one direction. And this only occurs when there are notes in both layers 1 and 2. So in the second bar, if I were to enter the same thing in layer 2, see now the stems are in their appropriate default position. It's only when you add notes in the other layer that the stems and beams get frozen, all right? Now in layers 3 and 4, by default they're not set to freeze in one direction or the other. It's only layers 1 and 2 that will behave like this off the bat. In a later video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about layers. That can be changed. You can change layer 3 or 4 to freeze in one direction, just like 1 or 2, if you want it to. And there's a few other options of how Finale handles layers, which I'll get into in a later video. But suffice it to say, for now, layers 1 and 2 are the only ones that will split like this. Okay. So generally, you're going to want to use those 2 layers most of the time. Now, a few other things about this. Let's start with rests. So let's say I'm going to insert a rest here in layer 2. You notice that the rest also goes lower than where it normally would be. Finale calls this floating. It's floating the rest here in this second beat, and it will float in layer 1 as well if I change that to a rest. All right, so it's basically floating away from the default position, which would be the center of the staff. This can be changed if you don't like it. In this case, this is not so great with that rest all the way up there. With the asterisk key, just press the asterisk key and it will toggle between the floating position and the default position, right? And you can do that with either layer. And one other thing about rest is that if we were to have the same rest at the same rhythmic position in both layers, like if I were to clear that out, the rests will combine and go back to their default position. All right, so it looks like there's only a rest in layer 1 right there. Actually, if I go into layer 2, you'll see that it's red. What's happening is that they're over top of each other, so you only see one at a time, right? But they are both there. If you don't like this default behavior by default, by the way, I'm just going to show you this real quick. In the document options, if you find layers, the very last option is consolidate rests across layers. And that's what Finale is doing. It's consolidating layers 1 and 2 in this instance. So if I uncheck that and hit apply, you'll see the rests split out to their floating positions by default. All right. So that's a global setting that will change all of your combined rests in that manner, depending on which way you have that checked. Normally, I'd say you'd probably want that to be checked because I think you're gonna like the results of that a little bit better by default. If you want to manually unconsolidate them, it does get a little weird. To float the second layer rest, you have to be in layer 1 and hit the asterisk key, and that should have floated layer 2. Yep. And then back and forth, toggle that. To float the layer 1 rest, you have to go to layer 2 and hit the asterisk key, and that will toggle the layer 1 rest for some reason. I'm not sure why it works like that, but that is how it works. And if you have it set the other way, by the way, if we go back to document options, uncheck consolidate rests, so now that they're both floating, the asterisk will do the same thing. It'll just toggle between floating position and non-default position, right? So you can kind of manipulate your rests that way, however you want. Again, I like having the consolidate rests across layers checked. I think it's overall a better option to have. All right. Also with ties, so if we go back into the second layer and let's say we're going to do something different here. Let's say we'll make that a half note tied to an eighth, right? You notice I still got that I still got that layer 1 rest floating. You'll notice that the ties are now frozen downwards. Again, if I were in layer 2 and I were to enter this into a fresh measure without notes in layer 1, you'll see that the tie will go upwards on the top note and downwards on the bottom note like it normally should. But when stems and beams are frozen in one direction, the ties will also freeze in that direction. It's just a nice little feature of that. And one more thing I want to show you. Now I mentioned you can have as many layers in a bar as you want, so let's do something like that. So we've got layer 2 here. We'll enter layer 1 again, put that back in there. And we can, if we want to enter something in layer 3, we could do that. Right. Now, of course, like I said, the layers 3 and 4 will not freeze stems and beams in one direction or another. So layer 3 is finding its default direction for its stems and beam, which in this case is downwards based on the position of where it is in the staff, right? But if you want to manually flip these, it's pretty easy. Just use the L key, L, on every one, and it will flip it, right? So you can have something like that. And we can even enter a whole note in layer 4 right there. Right, so you can have a lot of stuff going on. You could have up to 4 different layers in the same measure, all right? So that's the gist of layers, all right? Now let me just show you what voices are. Voices are slightly different. In fact, I've talked to a lot of longtime Finale users, and many of them aren't even aware that voices is a thing. And I show them what it is, and they're like, "Wow, I didn't even know that existed." There's probably a reason for that. It's sort of sometimes useful, but not really all that useful. there are instances where it is useful, and I'm going to show you one of them right now. So in the Speedy frame, you'll notice this V1 in the top left corner. That indicates that we're in voice 1. We can get to voice 2, and there are only 2 voices, just 1 and 2. There's not a voice 3 or 4 and whatever, just voices 1 and 2. To get to the second voice, all we do is hit the single quote key, and now we're in voice 2, as you can see in the top left corner. And if we enter notes now, we are entering a second voice, but still in layer 1. You'll notice that these notes are still black, so that's a layer 1 voice 2 notation right there. Interesting, right? What's different about voices versus layers in this case is that if I were to have entered this in layers, I would have had to put rests before this, before these eighth notes. Let me just show you that real quick. Just get rid of that. Go to layer 2. I have to do a half rest and a quarter rest, and then that, right? So we get the same thing, but you're going to have to deal with these rests, either hide them or move them or something like that. So in some cases, voice 2 can be helpful. There's a couple weird things about voice 2. Where you are with the crosshairs above in the rhythmic position will dictate which way the stems and beams go in voice 2. So what I just did is I had the crosshairs below, and again, I'll just enter that so you can see it. And the beams go below. If the crosshairs are above and I enter voice 2 and enter those same notes, that beam is going to be going upwards. So this is kind of wrong, right? So it is a little contextual as to where you are with the crosshairs when you enter voice 2. So you could actually use voice 2 in this manner to put eighth notes above that quarter note, right? So voice 1 and 2 are not necessarily, they don't function the same as layer 1 and 2, where layer 1 will freeze up and layer 2 will freeze down. Voices will freeze either way, depending on the context of where you enter the voice in relation to the notes that are already existing, if that makes sense. So voice 2 could go up or down in this case, all right? Just a weird thing to know about voices. Another weird thing about the voices is that the stem flip will only last as long as the rhythmic duration of where you're putting that, right? So in this instance, I've got a half note here. If I were to go into voice 2 and enter some eighth notes, right, we see that the stem on the C will flip upwards like we want it to. But if I were to keep going, the next 2 quarter notes will not flip, all right? So now this is an instance where this would make a lot more sense in layer 2. So most of the time I'm going to enter something like this in layer 2. But if I wanted to, for whatever reason, do what I just did in voices instead of layers, this is what we have to do. It's a little convoluted, but press the quote key to get into layer 2, enter the first 4, press the quote key again to get back to layer 1, and one more time to get back to layer 2. 2 more notes. One more time to get back to layer 1. One more time to get back to layer 2. Right, and then we have that. It's I think that what it's doing is that voices are generally used for one rhythmic position. So in the instance of this bar over here, you're just creating that voice for this quarter note, right? You're creating that second voice just for this quarter note. So I think the usefulness of the second voice is when you have something simple like this, where you just want those 2 eighth notes on just that beat, and you don't have to think about dealing with the rests in layer 2 and all that stuff. All right. So that's voices. Like I said, 99.9% of the time, it's more useful to use layers than voices, but there are occasions where you can use a voice instead. All right, so I think I covered it. That is voices and layers. I'm just going to check to make sure oh, you know what? One more thing. You can use voices and layers in tandem too. You can actually have a second voice in layer 2 if you wanted. That's why I had this measure out here set up. So we go into layer 2, and from here we can go to voice 2 and enter eighth notes. Right. Now the difference here is that in this instance, because layer 2 is freezing down all the time versus layer 1 freezing up. The stems and the voices are always going to go down because of that freezing nature of the layers, if that makes sense at all. So you can have different voices in different layers. Theoretically, if you're creative, you could get 8 different lines in any given measure, right? 2 voices in 4 layers, basically. It would probably look pretty messy, but it is possible to do that, all right? So that is voices and layers. I think I've covered it all, and hopefully this helps. Like I said, come back. I'm going to do another video specifically on layers, and I'll show you a little bit of how to customize the layers, customize the look of the layers, and all that stuff. And there's some other neat things that you can do in terms of manipulating layers and all that stuff. So, all right. Anyway, thanks for watching. Come back. We've got more videos to do on Speedy Entry, and I'll see you soon.